Let me welcome you all to this penultimate session, which is focused on the overall theme of our 3 days, which is the how do we get to the 2030 goals. The whole thought here was to get an overview of what accelerating those goals means at a national level or at an international level. We are very privileged to have with us, to set us thinking on this, in a keynote address, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, who is the Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog, the apex think tank of the government on issues of development policy. I have known Dr. Rajiv Kumar for many years. We've been friends, and so it's always a little embarrassing to introduce a friend in a highly formal way. But he has been held many positions in international organizations and in the government and in academic institutions. The one part where we were most often in contact was when he was the executive head of ICRI and I was on the board. So I'm sure we're all looking forward to listening to what he has to say on what does accelerating action towards the 2030 goals means for India. Dr. Rajiv.
Thank you very much, Dr. Desai. Good afternoon to everybody here. Ms. Noda, Mr. Bagai, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. A great privilege to be here, and especially to note that this is now the 20th summit. So first and foremost, congratulations to TERI for sustaining this effort, because I think this is incredible what they have done, and I hope that it will remain as important event on the international calendar for sustainability as it has become already. Ladies and gentlemen, as I'm sure all of us know, NITI Aayog has been charged with the responsibility of monitoring, reviewing and promoting the mainstreaming of sustainable development goals in the country. This is a heavy responsibility. This is a responsibility that we take very seriously, because I think this is one of the most important part of our mandate, especially because the mandate for NITI Aayog is to foster what we call cooperative and competitive development, competitive federalism in the country. And I say this simply because the mainstreaming of sustainable development goals in our country, in our country's development policies, in the mainstream, in our the blueprint that we designed going forward, will come about if and only if the SDGs are accepted and worked upon by the states. Whatever the central government may do, it would have to be the state which will have to be the carriers and the harbingers of the sustainable development goals. And there the two mandates that NITI Aayog has, which is of the cooperative federalism and competitive federalism, become very important. By cooperative federalism, what implies and what we have followed is to identify the best practices across all sectors and dimensions of the economy, to identify them, to see where how they could be replicated and scaled in the rest of the country. India being as diverse a country as it is, and given the fact that one size will never fit all here, we need to adapt these best practices. But the more important point is that very, very, very often a large number of best practices across different dimensions, whether it's in preschool education or it's in in agriculture or it's health or different whatever you might say, very often these best practices remain hidden, remain confined. If there is a Gajra-Chiroli model of public health, I'm not sure whether or not of people know what a great amount of work the couple is doing there. So that's the sort of thing that if NITI Aayog under cooperative federalism, in terms of sustainable development goals for each of the the development goals, we go about looking at these best practices, then bringing them to the table within NITI Aayog, bringing all the other states and provinces, to them, the relevant people there, and then to try and replicate them. A very good example is for, let's say, the remediation of legacy waste dumps, which is being done by Indore. and I think the success that it has had. Now, if we can replicate that across our 4,000 municipal corporations or urban local bodies, I think we would have solved a huge problem, because the Indore is using even waste to, energy. They're running their public buses on them and so on and so forth. Similarly, Pune, if the Pune corporation can float bonds, because to finance its development policies, I think this is something that can be done in other urban local bodies as well. So that's one part of it. The other part of it, as I said, is competitive federalism, and this is what I think is further our next sort of measure to accelerate the promotion of SDGs, which is that we want to get our states into a competitive spirit across all dimensions. And we don't hesitate in naming and shaming our states by bringing out different indices across a whole range of indicators. So we've done this one on, there is one on nutrition, there's another one on quality of school index, there's one on water management, which made quite visible here when we talked about the pending emergencies. We are trying to do this now for nutrition. We have done this for nutrition, and for SDGs in particular, we have brought out the Sdg Index itself, which compares the states, which has a comparison across the states, ranks them, and then ranks them according to the delta, according to the change, the improvement that they've had. We brought out the second edition in December. It has received, thankfully, a lot of recognition. When I was in New York at the General Assembly at the high-level political forum for SDGs in July, it was brought out that this is the only attempt, this is the only effort at a country bringing out a SDG index at the sub-national level, as to try and get the states to, compete with each other. And we are continuously improving upon this in the sense that we are refining the indicators. A lot of indicators at the moment we use are from secondary government sources that are published, but we are trying and make sure that we can even get some primary indicators by supporting, dipstick surveys, etc., across these fields. So I think this effort on our part, in my view, is one of the most important part of our efforts to accelerate the mainstreaming of SDGs in our country. It's very good to know and recognize that the Prime Minister himself, when he talks about Sabka Saath and Sabka Vishwas, implicitly supports the Sustainable Development Goals and has encouraged us to make sure that all of these are achieved by the agenda, the 2030, because we realize, and I think all of us in India realize what a big responsibility there is on our shoulders. Because if India doesn't achieve the SDGs by 2030, I think the world will not achieve them. The global achievement of SDGs would probably critically depend upon India's own achievement of the global, of these SDGs. And to that extent, it was satisfying to note that the UNDP's multidimensional poverty index, when it was brought out earlier last year, did mention the fact that we were able to achieve a reduction of 271 million people from poverty between 2005 and 6 to 2015 and 16. And this received a huge amount of recognition. And along with this, the large number of schemes that have been launched and effectively delivered in the last 5 years in the first term of this government have attracted global attention. Whether this is financial inclusion under Jan-dhan, or it is Saubhagya, or it's Ujjwala, or it's a Swachh Bharat, it's toilets, all of them have now received a very good amount of, and India seems to be, in some sense, playing an exemplary role across all these indices in the government. So, we have to recognize, and I think it's one of my tasks to convince our state governments that theirs is not just a role for their people, which is of course most important, but they have a global responsibility as well. And I think the more work that we can do, I think nothing is enough in this regard because of the dimensions and the scale and the diversity of our country. To this extent, we also have tried to localize our SDGs. The first step that I took in that direction is that, we've had 271 indicators under 17 goals. The first thing that our Department of Statistics had done to adapt them to the Indian needs was to convert this to 301. And when I took office in 2017, I said, this is just far too many. And this means that you cannot possibly monitor and track and so on and so forth. And I therefore insisted that we reduce them to a monitorable, to a manageable level. And I said, therefore, that let's choose the top 5 priorities for each of the 17, actually each of the 16, because the 17th is the global partnerships where the states don't come into play. And so therefore we did try, and in our SDG Index therefore reflects the fact that we include there about, I'm not sure the number, but I think 68 indicators that we monitor now. I said, let's choose the top 5, and therefore we can get 80 or so, which we can monitor more effectively, and that might be good enough for us. Moreover, I said that given that the distance, the diversity between Manipur and Gujarat, or between Kashmir and Tamil Nadu is so huge, let each state choose its own 5. As to what is more important. Because now Kerala has done whatever it has done on the social sectors. For us, for that to improve further, is one very difficult, but also may not be even required. If you've got 98% literacy, and if you've got the mortality and the infant, and the infant mortality and the maternal mortality as low as you are, and institutional deliveries, why don't we focus on something else, which might be more to do with agriculture or ecology or, and so on. So we encouraged states to choose their own and localize them. And therefore, as a result of that, I wonder how many of you have seen that, we brought out a volume on localizing of SDGs, in which each state was expected to provide its own, set of, indices. And therefore, we thought that will bring them more on board, and that will involve them and engage them further, rather than again say that, look, rather than give them a top-down instruction as to these are the 70-odd indicators that you have to follow or that you have to fulfill. With that, we recognized our responsibility for capacity building at the state level. Unfortunately, a large number of states have seen their so-called departments of planning become dysfunctional. And in fact, and they don't have really much of a role, because none of these states are now preparing the 5-year plans as they used to, or delivering them. And our hope is that most of these will become SDG monitoring units and will create their own dashboards, as we have done in NITI Aayog with the help of the UN system. Now we have in NITI Aayog, therefore, a dashboard which all the states now populate from the data that they've got. We do third-party audits as well. We do check on them. But the fact is that this dashboard keeps us alive, as it were, on a regular basis as to how the indices are doing. We would want our states to do the same, and we are working with them to create that capacity. Because once you do that, then you can take the Sustainable Development Goals down further from the states to the districts and then to the block level. And I think the day we can compete, that the day we can get our 6,500 blocks to compete with each other, or the blocks to compete within each state, I think we would have done a great task in mainstreaming and actually, achieving the SDGs. Last thing is that the great example that we have in front of us for this is our Aspirational Districts program. As you know, as many of you would know, we have 112 districts which we call aspirational, which the Prime Minister called aspirational. These are the most backward districts in this country. And the objective and the target is to raise their 42 indicators, social indicators, to the national level. And the idea is that if we are able to do that, then we make sure that the entire country would achieve the SDGs in the same breath at the same time. And this has to be done not by pumping in greater amount of financial resources, but by achieving greater convergence across departments and agencies and delivering and entities which deliver public services. As you would know, every district may have even up to 40 such government schemes, which, the implementation of which, the delivery of which is not known. They don't converge. They work in silos. And we have seen now that, and we have now got these districts to compete with each other. We've also instituted a reward for them for the best. We give them up to 10 crore for the best district every year, every month. So we have a substantial reward system. And the idea again is that if these aspirational districts compete with each other, and believe you me, there is an amazing amount of excitement at that level at the moment. And these districts, which were supposed to be punishment postings for our young IS officers, are now seen to be the places to go, because if you achieve something there, then that's recognized nationally at the highest levels. We want to take this down to the block level, and we have encouraged many of our state governments to say that please choose your own most backward blocks and get them to compete with each other. Last thing, ladies and gentlemen, is that we are into, we believe and we follow partnerships as much as possible. We want to partner with global agencies, we want to partner with trusts, with foundations, with the civil society organizations, with academic institutions, and whatever you might say. And we are doing this in practice all the time. And this is something that NITI Aayog, being the premier think tank of the country, or the government, would really push forward in many ways as we go forward. As I mentioned to you, we have done our dashboard with the help of the UN system. All our aspirational districts are being held by the Piramal Foundation, the Tata Trust, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We are working in the Jammu and Kashmir we had a meeting of 60 NGOs last year, which we're going to follow up with this year, etc., etc. So partnerships are the key, and partnerships are also to make sure that all possible stakeholders get involved in the achievement of our SDG targets. Once again, to say that we know that if we do not achieve Agenda 2030, then the world will come a cropper, and we cannot afford to have that, because a couple of things like climate change, the carbon constraint, and social indicators of illiteracy and poverty are upon us, and the people will not wait for us to deliver. They expect us to do so, and we are therefore bound to do so as well. Thank you very much for listening to me.
I want to thank Dr. Rajiv Kumar for this very comprehensive view of what is being done in order to put sufficient force and pressure behind the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and in that sense achieving the 2030, accelerating the advance to 2030. He has given us a very comprehensive view, which I'm sure we will learn a lot from. I would wish him great success in the work that he has done. He spoke of cooperative federalism and competitive federalism. I hope cooperative is more important than competitive, but I think this is very crucial in a country like India, and that is because nothing can be worse for development than an absence of cooperation between the center and the states, because it's the states who really deliver on development. But this is also a message which I hope our two international speakers will pick up, because I think it has some relevance at the global level also. I think he has correctly focused on the importance of monitoring performance. He talked of the dashboard, he talked of the many other things. But I think he also quite correctly emphasized localization. Don't treat what comes out of the UN's list as absolutely mandatory. It should be treated as a starting point. And from there should be localization. Localization in terms of doing things which are manageable at the country level and at the subnational level. And more important, the point that he raised, that you should distinguish within the country between one part and another. The themes which may be relevant in one place may not necessarily be the most relevant themes elsewhere. And I think this was a very valuable exercise that he spoke of, and he spoke about partnerships. That don't try and do this simply as government. This is something that has to be done by government in partnership with all of the others. So I want to thank him for this finding time to be with us at this session and giving us a very good picture of what is it that NITI Aayog is doing in this area. And I hope that some of the themes that he has mentioned, which are, in my view, relevant at the global level, will be picked up by our two panelists subsequently. Okay, then may I just turn to our two panelists. The two panelists represent the two key international organizations which are involved in this: the United Nations Environmental Program, the United Nations Development Program. From the United Nations Environment Program, we have Mr. Atul Bagai, who knows this country well. He is from here, but he now heads the UNEP office in Delhi and has been involved. One of the areas he's been heavily involved in is on the ozone side, but now, of course, he has a broader remit. And we have from the UNDP, Ms. Shoka Noda. She has been in the UN for a long time, and she has served in many places, and today heads one of the largest country programs of the UNDP. And before that, she was in the Maldives. So it was quite a big jump from the Maldives to India. You know, Maldives is one size and India is a different size. So she moved directly from Maldives to India, but she has worked in many other places also. So I would urge them to address the question of what is it that needs to be done at the international level in order to accelerate the progress to the 2030 goals. So may I say that, let me start with the lady first, Dr. Okay, come.
Thank you very much for the very generous introduction, and also thank you, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, Vice Chair of NITI Aayog, for a very comprehensive presentation. And I'm also honored to be speaking here together with Mr. Atul Bagai, the UNEP rep, and also a very good colleague of UN. I really would like to first congratulate India, the government of India, and especially NITI Aayog for your commitment, dedications to really accelerate SDGs. I have, as I was introduced before coming here, I was in Maldives. I also worked in Nepal and Mongolia and other countries. But more than any other countries, I think India really spearheads in terms of SDG acceleration and the commitment. And I can see that it's really a global leadership that I'm seeing here. I always say that if India succeeds, the world will succeed. As Mr. Rajiv Kumar said it right away, exactly more or less the same. And I do believe that India will succeed, and we remain optimistic. And the most important part of SDG achievement is the political commitment and political will. So I think we are on the right track. Today's session is called SDG Fast Tracking. So in order to do tracking, we just need to do fast implementation. And what does it really mean? In the context of SDGs, we often say we will leave no one behind. And when we say it, do we really think of who they are that we are referring to? And here I would like to introduce two publications which really help me personally, because I'm relatively new to India, but also hopefully to all of you, which is Multiple Challenges of Marginalized Communities in Achieving SDGs. Also 100 Hotspots of snapshot of socially excluded and vulnerable population group and SDGs in India. And these were both published by Wadanatodo Abhiyan, the consortium of CSO. I don't know whether any of you from Wadanatodo Abhiyan is here or not. Yes, no? Okay. Anyways, please look at it. This is where you can get human stories of SDGs. That, for example, transgender, for example, even the Dalit group within the, even within Dalit group, there is also a lowest within the scheduled caste, the youth, people in Northeast, women, survivors of gender-based violence, Dalit and the bonded laborers. These are the vulnerable groups that we cannot leave behind. And for that, I'm very pleased to be part of this CSO, civil society organizations consultations led by NITI Aayog to prepare for voluntary national reporting, which India will be presenting in New York in a couple of months. It's very important to really listen to the voices of those who may be left behind. So I really would like to congratulate NITI Aayog for leading these very important CSOs. So we do, behind this SDG Index, behind these statistics, we should remember these people. And 10 years from now, because we have, this is a decade of action. We have only 10 years to achieve SDGs. So we should be able to go back to those vulnerable groups from Dalit, from the survivors of violence, to ask them and see whether their life has substantially improved. And this is where UNDP would like to continue working with the state government, not only the national level, but also state government and in aspirational districts, to lift up their life. Mr. Kumar, you also mentioned about the partnership, and this is exactly what I also wanted to mention. The partnership is very important, and well, I've been in UNDP for 22 years, and when I think of my first years in United Nations, it's almost unthinkable to sit and discuss SDGs or MDGs with the private sector. And engagement of the private sector is the key to really drive the economy and also to make sure that nobody will be left behind. For the past 9 months, I have participated in many meetings, met many officials, state visit, but I think most things that I did is really to meet private sector. Here in the country, we have they are obliged to use 2% of the profit for CSR, and this is a remarkable scheme, that legislation that you have, and to bring private sector is another key, another drive for SDG achievement. So partnership and really to think of human stories behind those statistics is the key, and I hope that we can all really work together towards SDG achievement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Atul Bagai.
Thank you, sir. And in fact, I'm overawed by the fact that I've come back to India after almost 20 years. And as Shoka said, I'm also almost new to India as she is. But I'm overawed also by the fact that some of my gurus in environment, Pradipto Saab, sitting in front of me. So I do not know what gyan I can give to this august audience. But I could share some of the international experience that one has achieved over the last 20 years, one has seen in the last 2 years. I think Vice Chairman Saab hit the nail on the head when he said that we need to mainstream SDGs. And I think that will be the real key. I think most of the countries are looking at SDGs as something that UN has brought upon them. It's some global goal that has been set, and the countries have to follow it. And I think what Rajiv Saab said is the key to a successful implementation of these goals. All goals are something that each and every nation already has as part of its national planning process, or bringing prosperity to their countrymen. And this whole adage of thinking globally and acting locally is being very beautifully implemented in India through the SDG implementation, through the NITI Aayog. And I think that's the approach that is going to be successful in this regard. Unless these goals are considered as Indian goals and not as a UN goal, I don't think we'll be able to make too much progress. And when I say that, I think one of the real key steps is to see that they're mainstreamed into the national policy. So each and every ministry or department at the state government level that is concerned with a particular SDG needs to make a national policy in that regard in achieving those targets in the next 10 years. And only 10 years are left. In fact, this last decade, which started 31 days back, is going to go away very fast. And we need to see that in these 10 years, we are able to fulfill all these objectives, unlike what happened with the MDGs in the last decade. I'll give you a very small example. As the chair of this panel said, my past experience has been primarily on ozone. It's the most successful environmental agreement in the world. And the only reason why it is successful, apart from the fact that there are funding available for it, is the fact that global targets which all the countries agreed to were immediately translated into national targets. Whatever they agreed at a global level, the very first step that was done was that a national policy integration was done, so that it became part of the implementation of the entire country. And I think that is the approach we'll need to follow on this. The second issue which Rajiv Saab said of capacity building at the state government level is really the key. I have been visiting many states in the last 2 years I've been there, and this has been one of the biggest gaps in terms of understanding not only what these goals are, but I think the bigger issue that we need to address is the fact that the interconnectivity between the SDG goals, which means interconnectivity between the various departments at the state government level, that needs to be understood and strengthened. Power department needs to understand that what they are doing in their terms of progressing with energy demand or energy excess also has an impact on CO2 emissions. And that connection is very, very useful to be understood at the state government level. The area which we address, environment, of course, the key SDG indicator is the SDG 12. But if you're looking at all the 16 SDGs, each and every SDG has an environmental component. And that integration across even needs to be looked upon at the central level and the state government level, thereby meaning that what the Ministry of Environment is doing has to be supplemented and supported by a lot of other ministries, whether it be water sanitation or health or environment. This nexus between environment and most of the other developmental sectors is a very important area that needs to be understood. I will just, I'm very optimistic that with the kind of mechanism that NITI Aayog has put in, both cooperative and competitive, and I think competitive one is really very good in terms of the way it is exciting the state governments to look at becoming number one. The whole city cleanliness drive that happens through the Ministry of Urban Affairs in terms of which is the cleanest city actually has motivated so many cities to come forward to adopt innovative mechanisms. But I think 2 or 3 factors we really need to look at. And if you're looking at the macro picture, the Paris Agreement and the 2-degree target which we set upon ourselves, are we going to meet that? And if we think we are going to meet that, most of your SDG goals will be met automatically. And the emission gap report which UNEP brought out recently, last month it was launched, the results are not very optimistic in terms of where this whole world stands. And if we look at where we stand, if we need to achieve 2 degree or the ambition of 1.5 degree, in the next 10 years, we need to cut down our CO2 emissions by 7.6% every year. Now that is huge, and if you are looking at the last 10 years, our CO2 emission increase globally has been 1.5% per year. So you can see the huge gap that is coming in. But I think the most important point in this regard is the fact that the government, whether they are state governments or the central government, they are all committed to working together, and from a UNEP perspective and all the other UN organizations which are working in India, we stand committed to supporting the central government in this regard.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I think, I'm sorry, we don't have time. We had a very useful discussion. We don't have time for opening it up to the audience. I just, quick word at the end. As somebody who was there in the UN for a long time, and I was there at a time when the UN was pretty successful in its work in getting development ideas together in the great global summits. My one concern is that the SDGs are shifting the focus from global cooperation to what countries should be doing. I think the global cooperation that we need is not just SDG 16. It is required throughout. And climate is one area which is an obvious one. He talked about the 2-degree one. And now sitting back after having left the UN for 15 years, having been involved in the climate process, I have serious doubts as to whether the UN process is capable of delivering on something like this. And part of the reason is that our whole negotiating process in the UN is a quid pro quo based process. I'll give you this concession if you give me this concession. Now, this is fine when you're talking of tariff reform, but it doesn't necessarily work when you're talking about a shared problem where we have to all take joint responsibility for solving things. And this, to me, is a problem. The second thing that is clear is there's clear evidence that the pressure behind the 2 degrees centigrade often is greater outside governments than it is inside. I'm surprised at the number of corporations which are signing on to the science-based targets and so on. The number of subnational entities which are prepared to go much further than the national governments are prepared to go. And I think we need to start thinking about a global process on these issues, which is not completely constrained by the limitations of a UN process. And we just finally say to Dr. Rajiv Kumar, in 2022, India will be chairing the G20. You will be the chair of the G20. The core of the problem of global cooperation that we have is getting the G20 to get its act together. I hope that India uses this opportunity to really pressurize the G20 countries. Remember, on climate, amongst the G20 countries, India is the only country which is on target and is considered to have committed as much as it needs to commit to get to 2 degrees. None of the other 19 are in that category. So I hope India uses this opportunity to pressurize the G20 into really significantly stepping up its cooperation in these areas, and the attention gets back to the importance of global cooperation. So I want to thank Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Ms. Shoka Noda, and Atul Bagai for this very useful exercise. So thank you very much. Let's give them a hand.